So now let me introduce the next presenter, who is Päivi Lujala. Hi, Päivi. She is Professor of Geography and Academy of Finland Research Fellow at the University of Oulu in Finland. So her research focuses on two broad topics. First, the management of valuable natural resources in the global south, and second, the adaptation to climate change and related climate change related natural hazards. So her current research on climate change focuses on climate migration in the global south and community resilience in Norway. Päivi, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction and for the invitation to give a presentation today here at the conference. And I would also like to thank the previous presenters and for putting the stage for my presentation, because it's so nicely has already set the stage for why this type of research is important. So as we have heard today, it's very important to in the case of migration in general, but with the climate migration especially, is to understand who will be moving and under which conditions as well. And something that we perhaps have not been talking so much today is to try to figure out what would be the best places for these people to go if they need to move. But that's research that we do within this same project that I won't be touching on that today. It's a really kind of key question for the international community and the countries that are highly exposed and vulnerable to climate change to understand these questions and these issues. And like Laurie mentioned already, there exist assessments that based on how many people are exposed to certain types of hazards, like the groundswell report that Laurie referred to, that looks at the slow onset type of events. And these type of assessments tend to say something that from tens of millions of people to hundreds of millions, even billion people might need to move in the coming decades. But those are only kind of based on the mathematical modeling, based on how many people live in these areas. But what we know less about is the kind of the individual and the household level where the decisions are made. And the big questions there are, will be they moving? And do they see the environmental change as a key factor in their migration decision or not? And are they actually prepared to move? And especially this preparedness can be very important, because if people are not prepared to move and then they have to move, that difference whether you're prepared or not and whether you can move when it's best for you and go to places that would be best for you can make a huge difference for the outcome of the migration. So in this paper that I'm going to present today, I'm going to touch on some of these issues. Before starting more on the paper, I would like to acknowledge my co-authors from Norway, from Canada, from Bangladesh. And this case study our case study takes place in Bangladesh, which is among the 10 most affected countries by the climate or weather-related hazards over the last 10, 20 years, and is also increasingly exposed to climate change-related impacts. And within Bangladesh, we studied two communities, two unions in the southwest Bangladesh that are extremely exposed, even within Bangladesh, to different types of climate-related hazards. These are, as you can see from the map, are very low-lying unions, so they're very above the sea level. and they basically rely on agriculture and aquaculture. Both these communities have about 30,000 people living in them. They have been hit by strong storms and cyclones. The last one was the Amphan last year in May, but just the year before they were hit by another cyclone called Bulbul, and then perhaps you remember the Sitran Isla that hit Bangladesh about 10-15 years ago. So they are highly exposed to this type of cyclones. But also in more general, not only in relation to the cyclones, but more generally to storm surges and river flooding. So here you can see some pictures from the how the riverbanks are affected by the flooding, and how the local people try to protect their properties from these kind of flood events. Other big challenge in this area is the soil salination. So this is due to different reasons, but sea level rise being one, another one being the stronger and stronger storm surges that bring the salty water to the fields and inland. This leads to health risks, contamination of drinking water. So, for example, in Gabura, which is one of our study locations, people now either have to buy water or collect rainwater or drink from the ponds. And it also causes land use changes. So this is again the Gabura, one of our study unions. As you can see that from 95, when most of the island was still under agriculture, 20 years later, it's mainly only aquaculture. So people have had to change from agriculture to shrimp farming and crab farming. Also, the environmental changes are taking toll on the mangrove forest. So this is the famous Sundarbanas mangrove forest that protects the coastline, the people living the coastline from the cyclones and from the storm surges. But it's here in the picture on the left, you can see how it used to look like with the big trees. Now, a couple of years back, it is very different now. It's smaller trees, and much of the although it's still wild, but it's the type of trees growing there is changing. So before going into the details, what we did in our study areas, just very briefly about our main key results that I'm going to present today. So despite all these environmental changes that I just told you, very few people in these two areas actually expect to move in the near future, to migrate. And this despite the fact that they actually do expect that the environmental change will get worse where they live. I will show you the results later. And when they think about migrating, they rather think that if they migrate, it's because of the rapid onset type of hazards like the cyclones, and not because of the slow creeping changes in their environment. So how we did our study? So basically, what we did was a survey, and that data we then analyzed using regression analysis, and then we did what is called discrete choice experiment to elicit the people's choices a little bit more. We did 2 rounds of qualitative fieldwork in these areas in 2018, and then we went back in 2019. We piloted the survey and the experiment and did the training, and then run the experiment and the survey. And we plan to do a follow-up now in 4 weeks if possible, otherwise a bit later this year, where we will follow all these households that we interviewed in 2019 to see whether actually whether they have moved or whether they have updated their beliefs about the future migration. We interviewed in total 410 adult respondents in these two unions. So we went in each village in these unions. We randomly selected the households and we interviewed equal number of females and males. A little bit about our respondents. So on average, our respondents were 44 years old, and most of them had lived all their lives in their community. In average, they had, well, about 55% of them had completed primary or secondary school. So that means that over 40% hadn't done that. On average, they were rather poor. Main occupations were day laborers, they farming on land. But then remembering that we have 50% of the sample is women, so that means that over 40% were housewives. Most of them had never moved, but they did know about others that had moved. So in average, they knew about 14 other households that had moved already. On average, they were risk averse, well, that they had felt that they had invested way too much in their current location to move away, and they expected that their incomes would go down if they migrated. They didn't have much confidence in the protection measures in place in their communities, and especially when it came to the protection of their own house or their livelihoods. And few of them had other people that they could rely on in the form that they could ask for major favor, or had relatives that could help them if they had to move. And when looking at our results, so first I'm going to present some descriptive results from our survey. So the first one is that almost 90% of our households reported that for sure they would not migrate over the next 5 years. We did ask this in the way, so we asked about whether, well, we were interested in knowing whether the whole household would migrate. So not individual person from the household, but the whole household, and that whether they would migrate permanently. And we asked it for the next 5 years. So 90% said that they wouldn't migrate over the next 5 years. But what we saw from the data was that the majority of them were very concerned about the climate-related environmental changes in their areas and their impact on their livelihoods. So in the questions, whether they think that the extreme weather or the soil salinity and degradation in general would have a devastating effect on their household in the near future. So if you look here, so basically none said that it wouldn't have a devastating impact on them. When we asked more specifically about the livelihood sources, then we can see that very few expect that there will be no impacts, while over 50% thinks that there will be quite severe impact on their livelihoods in the near future. When we asked them that what would be their main reason if they had to move in the next 5 years, so what would be the main reason for that? So here again, we see that people think that it's especially the cyclones and other types of life-threatening natural events that would force them to live, while almost none said that it would be the slower creeping changes in their environment that would be the reason for moving in the next 5 years. Quite a few of them said that it would be actually the pull factor, so it would be the better economic opportunities elsewhere that would be the main reason for moving in the next 5 years. Then we also studied our material using regression analysis. So I'm just going to show you a couple results from those analyses, and basically they confirm that it's the environmental shocks that possibly impact people's stated prediction of moving in the next 5 years. And we didn't find any relation between the vulnerability or of the housing situation. So we asked what material the house was built of and whether they had previously experienced damage from the flooding event. That in the regression analysis, it didn't come out as strongly as perhaps in the descriptive part of the analysis. Other thing that we found in the regression result in regression analysis was that it is so that it's the poorest and the wealthiest that see themselves most likely to move. So those that are in the middle of the wealth distribution, they are those that most likely say that they won't be moving in the next 5 years. Then we did a discrete choice experiment. So this is a way to elicit or make people to balance different choices at the same time and trade-offs. So basically you ask people to evaluate 2 scenarios at a time where that are slightly different, and then they have to tell under which of the 2 scenarios they would be more likely to move. This type of analysis told us that, again, it was the damage caused by sudden type of natural hazards that most likely would cause them to move. So it's in this case, we asked in the way that whether if their house was destroyed or not. So that's the thing that came most strongly in our analysis. And again, we didn't find any evidence that the slower environmental degradation type of processes would play a significant role in the migration decision. So it's really seemed to be about the sudden onset type of events that people thought would be the most important of the environmental factors for their decision to move. So to conclude, it was a very few households that expected to relocate elsewhere in the next 5 years, and it was fast onset type of events that were more important for that decision than the slow changing environmental factors. Although the people told that they felt the consequences of those very much in their life, both when it comes to the income and the household security. I didn't talk so much about the poorest and richest household in our sample, but just note here that it looked like that the poorest and the richest in our sample were those that thought that they would be the most likely to move in the next 5 years.
Thank you, Päivi. Thank you for your presentation. It was, again, very interesting, and I think very complementary to what we've heard so far, and somehow consistent with the results of Flore, but through a smaller lens, a very micro approach. I think it's very interesting to have the results on these surveys that you conducted in Bangladesh. Thank you very much.